Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to give my video a couple minutes to load. I'm going live through Zoom, so it takes just a couple minutes before everything gets loaded, and it looks like we're good to go. Okay, so let me get my video up on the screen so I can see if anybody comments. Welcome, everybody, to our first Facebook Live in the Effective Language Therapy for SLPs Facebook group. I am actually going to be, for the foreseeable future, going live every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Central Time. So I'm super excited to do this first Q&A for you today. So something else I wanted to go through are just some ground rules of the group, and then we're going to get into our topic today. How I do it is a lot of you are joining the group, and I always ask you, what are your questions about language therapy? I always ask you when you first joined the group, you might have gotten a welcome post or something like that, or seen yourself tagged. And I ask you, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to language therapy? So I take all of that into account with the information that I share in this group and what I'm going to be talking about on these Q&As. Of course, you can always hop on live and ask me questions live as well. So that's always welcome. But usually I'll have a topic planned for the week just so that you know what kinds of questions to bring. So just a couple things. This is a pretty new group. We started it a month or two ago. So I'm super excited that we've got over 1,000 members now. If you have colleagues who are working with K through 12 populations and are working with a lot of kids who have language disorders on their caseload, I'd love if you could invite them to this group. I have a lot of different resources that I've compiled over the course of my time as an SLP since 2004 and during my doctoral work when I made language therapy my area of specialization. So what I've done with my blog and all the resources that I share on my page and in this group is just basically compiled a lot of my doctoral research and things that I've put into practice into blog posts, videos, things like that. And that's what I share in this group. And that's why the discussions all center around those topics. So a couple of things about this group. You'll notice that I am the only one who posts in this group. Me and my team are the only ones that post here for a couple of reasons. It's because I know that Facebook and social media in general can be a huge time waster. And I know that I'm in a lot of Facebook groups that sometimes they're really helpful in finding advice, but I find that a lot of times they can also be big time wasters like social media. I can get sucked into threads where there's drama or there's discussions that are going back and forth and nothing's getting resolved. I don't want this group to be like that for you. I want the discussions to be really focused so you can come in, get your questions answered, find resources that are going to help you to take those next steps, whether it be just gaining some key insights, or, as you know, I do offer some paid programs, whether that be figuring out which of our paid programs and services is right for you. So I want this group to be really efficient so that you can come in, get your questions answered, and get to work doing what you do best, which is providing amazing services for your students. So how this group works is, again, I've got specific threads already set, and you can simply reply in the comments with questions, with comments that add to that discussion and things like that. And you can always send us a message at our Dr. Karen Speech and Language page if you've got a question or you want something to be posted in the group, you're not sure if it's appropriate, or you're not sure, how to get that discussion started. So with all that being said, again, I would love if you could invite your colleagues to this group. Just share the link with them. I will share, actually, let me go over here really quickly. And I'm going to obviously share the direct link to this group that you're going to want to share with your friends here. There, I'm going to comment right there. There is the URL that you're going to want to share. So it should have just gone in there. Something to note, I do ask that people respond to all the questions when they join the group. Otherwise, we don't approve the posts. We want to make sure that we have people who are, number one, SLPs or in a related profession. Obviously, if we've got psychologists, reading specialists, that's fine too, but this is a very SLP focused group. We want to make sure that we've got the right people in here. And then also I want to make sure that you're really thinking about what you want to get out of this group. And so that's why I've got those other two questions in there when you join. So with that being said, we're going to get to the topic today that has come up both in this group from people who are interested in joining us in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, and then also some questions that have actually come up in the private Language Therapy Advanced Foundations Facebook group. So that surrounds how we handle evaluations, data collection, and how we handle tweaking our goals and how we're managing our students' progress or measuring our students' progress when we're doing a couple things. So that could be number one, when we are inheriting language goals from somebody else. So for example, a student moves in, they have an IEP or a therapy plan, and you've got to use somebody else's goals. And based on your assessment, you may or may not be sure if those goals are appropriate or if they make sense. So that's one situation. A lot of times you've got to just kind of take the IEP as it is and just start seeing the student, and you might not know if those goals are correct. Number two would be a situation where you might be revamping some of the therapy techniques that you are working on, and you're a little bit stressed as far as being in compliance and knowing how to do maybe a beginning and ending assessment to see if what you're doing is working. Or if you're just worried about, okay, I'm shifting my focus in therapy. Do I need to switch my goals? And what if I'm switching my focus for all of my language cases? If that is a situation that I'm in, do I need to go and update all of my IEPs and things like that? So I wanted to talk through some of those situations. So let's talk about situation number one, which is actually, you know what, let's talk about these situations together. So let's say the situation is that you have a bunch of language therapy goals, and for whatever reason, you're thinking, I've been working on these tasks right here, and I'm starting to realize that I need to really shift my focus as far as how I'm getting to the end goals for my students. And maybe that might be because you think the therapist that had the student before you wrote some goals that you're kind of like, well, I get what you're working on, but I don't necessarily think that I would have worded them that way. Or maybe you've written goals a certain way and you've decided that you want to shift your focus, and those goals you're not really sure if they line up. So for whatever reason, you want to change the goals, or you want to change the focus of your therapy. So this is how I look at this. A lot of times you want to look at goals and what you're measuring when you're actually, tallying off whatever you do in therapy. You want to look at it as kind of a benchmark. So you don't have to necessarily measure a student's progress on every single thing that you ask them to do in therapy. You just want to pick a couple representative things that you think will give the best indication of your students' overall improvement in language growth. So that means that you might be doing certain tasks in therapy within certain activities that might not always be outlined in the goals. That also might mean that you have this one behavior over here that's in your goal, and you aren't necessarily always asking the student to do that task over and over again in therapy for the purpose of improving that student's overall functioning. So remember that the goals are just one little thing that's going to help you measure if your student is making progress. It doesn't necessarily need to inform everything that you do in therapy. And so that's why it doesn't necessarily matter if you are shifting the focus of your therapy for whatever reason, whether it be you think that whatever the former SLP that had the student wrote on their paperwork doesn't quite line up, and you're realizing that the student needs to work on things that maybe they didn't bring up in their report, or that that aren't necessarily clear on their goals, or whether it be that you've realized some things that you didn't realize or that you didn't know when you wrote that report a year ago or 6 months ago or whatever. Whatever the reason is, you do not have to go back and totally rework the entire IEP unless there are really, really, really significant changes. If the general area of focus, for example, it's all language processing, if that's the same, you probably don't have to do the IEP amendment. Same thing if you're kind of starting to realize that you might be a little off base, or you want to switch the focus with all your language cases, which is often the situation when a lot of SLPs come into our program, Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. A lot of times they're starting to realize that they were working over here and they're not seeing progress with this whole group of students, and they really want to revamp their system for all these students. I never tell them, I say, you do not have to go and change those students' IEPs and create more work for yourself. What you want to simply do is shift the focus of your therapy and, yes, still track progress on the goals that you have, but then you can tweak the goals when their IEP comes due. This is why it's okay to do that. Let me give you a specific example that is the most common thing that I see when SLPs come into our program. A lot of times they might be working on these high level skills over here. Their students are not processing language. So they might have those goals for following directions, or maybe they have a WH question goal. Maybe they have a goal on just being able to answer high level reading comprehension questions like stating the main idea, problem solving, inferencing, whatever. So that's the end goal. That's what you want students to do. In order to be able to function at school, they've got to do all those high level language skills. But a lot of times the problem, the reason that they're not doing those things is because they do not have these foundational skills and they can't comprehend at the word and sentence level. So for example, they might struggle with vocabulary and need some work on semantics and really deep processing on just defining and describing words and pulling out semantic features. Or maybe they are struggling with some grammatical structure and need some work on morphology, or some sentence structure. They're struggling with complex sentence structures and need some work on comprehension at the sentence level. If they're not comprehending at the sentence level, they're not going to comprehend the big picture, which is why over here they're struggling with high level comprehension. So a lot of times what happens is that people come into our program and they are focusing on like stating the main idea, and the student is having breakdowns at the word and sentence level. So of course they can't comprehend the entire paragraph or page or a couple pages or whatever. They're totally lost. They need us to back up and work over here. And so a lot of times SLPs, when they learn our process, they're like, this makes total sense, but I have all these goals over here for reading comprehension. You do not need to change those goals. You might even keep those goals when you rewrite the IEP. The reason why is because these things over here are simply strategies to get to the end goal. You're still working on reading comprehension. When you're working on vocabulary, you're doing something that impacts comprehension. So you're still working on reading comprehension, even if you're not literally just asking your students reading comprehension questions. Yes, sometimes you obviously do have to pull those tasks in when you take data and things like that, but you don't have to do it every single session. So let's say that you've realized that, you know what, I've been doing this high level comprehension work. My students aren't even ready to respond to that. And there is a ton of research. If you have watched my webinar, I will share a link in the comments, but if you have watched my webinar, the 5-component system to language therapy, you may have already seen that there is some research, or there is quite a bit of research that shows that if we don't have those high level comprehension things, then you're not necessarily going to the students aren't necessarily ready for that high level comprehension work. So if you're kind of thinking, oh my gosh, well, okay, I'm going to start a shift over here and start working on vocabulary. Do I need to change the goals? And all of a sudden, you know, have these goals for working on semantic features or sentence structures or whatever? Not necessarily. If you're in the middle of an IEP and you know your student's IEP is coming up, you can simply start working on those skills. And all the data that you really need to take is, yes, you probably want to start taking some notes on, for example, how many semantic features a student could name, or how well a student was able to come up with a complex sentence or answer a question about a complex sentence. And I go through a lot of these things in detail in the program. So whatever the task is, yes, you can still tally whether your student got that task correct. But then when you're actually taking data on the IEP, you're going to do it for whatever goal you have. And what I recommend is that a lot of time I tell my members, take data on whatever you did that day. And then maybe, every 6 weeks or so, you're taking data on that particular goal. That's what I recommend, is that you do a really deep data collection every quarter at least, or whatever it says on your paperwork that you're required to do. That's what I recommend. If you're in a district or organization that says you got to take data every day, just maybe do a quick check, for just a couple minutes every day and write something down so that you're in compliance. But then you want to, whatever your goals are, if they're a little bit different than the tasks that you're actually doing to get to the goals. Again, remember, studying vocabulary words and studying sentence structures is going to get to those end goals of better comprehension. So if this looks a little different than whatever the goal is on the IEP, that's okay. Just, take data on what you're doing while you're doing it, and write down whatever notes you can, and then just, quickly do whatever you need to do at the end of the session or every 6 weeks to take data on those actual goals. And then if you're thinking, what, it would be better if I revamped my goals because I am focusing a little bit differently in therapy, that's okay. Just do that when the IEP comes up. Because remember, your goal as an SLP, and this is whether you're in the school system or not, even if you're working with a school-age child and you're not actually in the schools, what's a student's job full-time? Where are they focusing a lot of their energy when they have to do those really language-rich tasks? Well, usually it's something academic. So you're still working on those academic skills. It's still part of what you do, is helping students to do better on those academic tasks. So this is your focus, and your goal is to help students function better in those situations, have better comprehension. That's still your goal, whether you're in the schools or not. But again, remember, we want students to be able to access that curriculum. So if you're doing these things over here with vocabulary and syntax and better comprehension at that foundational level, you are going to be impacting these things over here. So you're technically working on the goals, even if it doesn't seem directly that you're working on the goals. And yes, I do in the program talk about how you can cycle through a bunch of techniques. And then again, when students are ready, pull in those high level comprehension things, because those are really important. But a lot of times people are way over here and they're totally skipping all of this over here, which is that more foundational work. And that's a lot of times where the missing piece is for them. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've inherited this IEP and it's totally, the goals are funky or whatever, do I need to totally revamp things? Or I'm changing my therapy focus, do I need to change all my goals? No, you don't. It's okay. Just shift your focus. You're probably going to be doing something that's going to be working towards those goals, even if you're not always directly working towards those goals. So when it comes to evaluation, that's how I would handle it with the data collections and the goals and the inherited goals. With the evaluation, I tell people, again, same thing. When people come into the program, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm shifting my focus. Do I need to totally change my evaluation protocol? No, not necessarily. I would say that you want to continue using the language evaluations that you have accessible to you. And I do, again, talk about, there is a manual that comes in the program where we talk about things like, okay, which evaluation tools are best for assessing all these different areas, and how do you format your reports so that you're talking about the relevant information that you're going to be working on in therapy. I think a lot of us have already realized that you don't just literally want to write goals that will fill in the blanks for grammatical endings or whatever that subtest is that your student struggled with. You want to use that to get some information about the areas where your student is likely to struggle. And so the areas that I teach people to look at if they are wanting to improve their students' academic language and high level comprehension for academic tasks would be looking at things like
things that would impact their decoding abilities. So morphology, orthography, and phonology. So looking at some of the different tasks on the language assessments that you already have available to you, looking into how the student responded and what each different subtest might be assessing, pulling together that information and figuring out, okay, based on what I know from where they came out low, how is that going to translate into the techniques that I do in therapy? So just using what you already have to figure out, okay, what's the best way to facilitate these skills? And then same thing goes with things like semantics and syntax. You want to figure out, okay, what are the key big areas that the student is struggling with? And then what we do is I show people how to focus on the key tasks that are going to have the biggest impact in that area. And you can do this with language evaluation tools that are already available to you. So we talk about, the self, the told, the different vocabulary assessments that are out there. I really like the language processing test, the word test, the listening comprehension test. You can use all of those, and it's simply a matter of problem solving and just lining things up. So again, same thing with evaluations, and we do talk through a lot of case studies in the members group, but the main thing to take away is that when you're changing your focus in therapy, you don't necessarily have to totally throw out what you're doing before when it comes to writing goals, data collections, and your assessments. A lot of times, you're probably already doing a lot of things correct. What we show you how to do is shift that therapy focus. So shift what you're doing in therapy that's actually going to just change what you do as a result of those evaluations, as a result of the goals that you've written, and really change the way that you're getting to the end goal rather than completely throwing those things out. So hopefully you're starting to see that you probably have a lot of tools in place. It's just a matter of shifting that therapy focus. So it's really, when we think about revamping our language therapy, it's really more attainable than you think when you do have the right focus. So when you are shifting and again, starting to work on something different in language therapy, that technique is just simply like a vehicle. It's like your goal is the destination. That technique that you're going to use is just simply a different vehicle or a different road to get to that end goal that you were already working towards anyways, which again is helping your students to succeed in school. So a lot of people worry about curricular alignment and, is this aligned with the curriculum and things like that? Well, if it's a language skill and it's going to help your students succeed in school, of course it's aligned, because that's our job, is to help our students access the curriculum. So that is how I would shift your focus when you're thinking about evaluations. You want to figure out how to use what you have rather than trying to get more stuff. What you can actually do, and what I teach people how to do, is come up with a set of core strategies and just cycle through those strategies that you know are going to make the biggest impact on vocabulary, sentence level comprehension, and then in turn, high level comprehension. There are actually some key language skills that when you focus on them, it's kind of representative of the bigger areas. One example would be, for example, we teach people how to teach students how to have better production of complex sentences. A lot of times with syntax, there are so many different sentence structures, people don't know where to start. Complex sentences are one of those skills that are a good representation of the other skills. So if you have assessments that require your students to elicit complex sentences and say complex sentences or comprehend them, that's a good measure of syntax that's going to be representative of whether your student needs work on this entire area. And then working on that skill is something that's going to impact all of their syntactic skills across the board. And yes, you want to pull in other sentence structures. We talk about how to do that as well in the program, but you want to start thinking about those skills that are Number one, representative of other language skills, because that's going to help you to make your goals more focused and will help you figure out what you should pay attention to on your evaluations, what you should pay attention to when you're collecting data, and also what you should pay attention to when you're figuring out what skills to target. So to get a little bit more clarity, and if you have some questions about the research that we use to figure out, again, that we use to compile all the different techniques in the program, I will share. Let me see if I can get my screen up here. I've got a ton of monitors up right now, and I had my webinar presentation up earlier. If I can't find it right now, I will share it in the comments as soon as I sign off. But to learn more about that 5-component system that we teach, you're just going to want to watch our webinar that will walk you through that entire system, the research behind it, and how it's really the framework for the system that we teach. So I have 2 action steps for you today. Number one, if you want to learn that system that we teach, register for that webinar. It is an automated webinar, which means that it's playing multiple times a day. We do that because that way there are a lot of different viewing options for you. So we want as many people as possible to be able to watch that. So that's why it's playing at a lot of different playing times every day. So if you click on that registration page and you don't see any times that work for you, just try again later today. There should be one within the hour. So that's the first thing, is check out our webinar. The second thing, if you have other colleagues who are doing language therapy, working with pediatric populations, then we'd love if you would share this group with them and invite them to the group. I've already shared that link in the comments to the group, so just share that with them. We'd love to have them here. All right, so thanks so much, everybody who tuned in. And I will be doing these Q&As every Wednesday at 3 o'clock p.m. Central Time. So, again, when you join the group, obviously you let us know what your questions are, but feel free to leave comments below this video as well if you've got questions you want me to talk about or topics you want me to talk about in future Q&As. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening.